love the opportunity to share. And today is a special day. It is in recognition of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's the day that's recognized, but his actual birthday was this past Saturday on the 15th, which is also Founders Day for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So happy belated 114th Founders Day to all of my sorors. I love you dearly. And happy birthday to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Just as a little bit of history, I chose this book. Well, actually, I didn't choose this book. My daughter chose this book, Madison, and you may be wondering where she is. She's actually over playing Roblox with her friends in the next room. So she told me to read this book, Mom. And then when it was time to go live, she said, okay, I'll see you after a while. So I don't think she's going to make it. But I found this book at Five Below, actually. Five Below has a really good collection of step up readings or step up readers for those who are starting to read, who are in their, who are preschool age, then who are moving on up to the next age, year, or phase. And so this is step 3, and it just was very timely to have this book. So if you could just gather around if you want to, and we'll do story time. And this one is called Dream March, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington. I really hope for those of us who actually learned so much about Dr. King that we remember what this march was. And so let's learn about it together. This is by Vonda Michoud Nelson with illustrations by Sally Warren Comport. Everybody has dreams. Some we share with family and friends, some we hold in our hearts. On August the 28th, 1963, one man's dream was heard across the nation. When the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a boy growing up in Georgia, he could not have imagined a day like this. People traveled from all over the country to Washington, D.C. They rode buses, trains, airplanes, and cars. Some walked over 200 miles from Brooklyn, New York. One man rolled 698 miles from Chicago on skates. It took him 10 days. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the stick-to-itiveness? Look, and there's him on his roller skates. Over 250,000 people gathered in the nation's capital. Singers, authors, actors, government officials, and other famous people attended. But ordinary citizens were the real stars of the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. People packed the National Mall from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial, young and old of every color, side by side, hand in hand. Many wore their Sunday best. They carried signs, they sang, I woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom, and we shall overcome someday. Black people fought for many years for the right to be treated with respect. In the 1950s and 1960s, Black Americans organized and fought extra hard. Their fight was called the Civil Rights Movement. And if you can see the signs, it's saying, I am a man. I am a man. That was one of the clarion calls coming out of the movement. Meaning I am a person. Martin and others held peaceful protests against laws that kept Black people and white people apart. They fought for the right to attend the same school and eat in the same restaurants. They fought to use the same bathrooms and drink from the same water fountains. They fought to sit on any empty bus seat and to have the same chance at a job. Because for those of you who are unfamiliar with this time, who are younger, there was a time in this country when white people were separated from all other people, not just Black people, all other people, but primarily Black people. They fought for the right to vote. The protesters won some battles and new laws made things better, but Black people were still treated unfairly. In 1963, activists A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin and other civil rights leaders decided to take the fight to the nation's center of power, Washington, D.C. The march organizers wanted to show President John F. Kennedy, Congress, and all Americans how many people believed in this cause. The Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. The marchers wanted Congress to make sure everyone was treated that way. United, they walked together. Some were silent, determined, intent, yet hopeful. Most chanted and sang, beaming, joyful, their hearts light. Lord have mercy, that is not a church singer right there. The marchers crowded the mall's reflecting pool. Some took off their shoes and socks to soothe their feet in the cool water. Others climbed trees for a better view. Lucky children perched high on shoulders. They looked toward the statue of Abraham Lincoln. It had been 100 years since President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. As an aside, remember, this happened in 1963. The Emancipation Proclamation was actually signed January 1st of 1863. It could not be enacted until 1865 because that is when the Civil War ended, which helped free the slaves. Why were Black Americans not free yet? Have you guys ever been to the Lincoln Memorial? If you haven't and you're able to be in the DC area, I just recommend that you actually go, and to the Washington Monument and to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. President Kennedy and other officials worried that the marchers might become violent. Thousands of police and soldiers were called out to keep order. There was no need. The March on Washington was the largest human rights rally in American history, and there was no trouble. Martin had one of the strongest voices for civil rights. He had been jailed for standing up for Black people. His house was firebombed by people who wanted him to stop, but he did not scare easily. Martin was a minister. He had faith, and wow, could he preach. When Martin spoke, it was as if he could read the minds of people and feel what was in their hearts. Other leaders gave inspiring speeches at the march, but Martin's words on that hot August day made history. In his speech, Martin said Black people were tired of waiting for their rights. He said, now is the time for justice. Now is the time for brotherhood. He said, no one is free until everyone is free. Martin spoke forcefully, with grace and dignity. His friend, Mahalia Jackson, the gospel singer, called out, tell them about the dream, Martin. He put aside his written words. I have a dream, Martin said, that little Black boys and Black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. Martin had a dream that his children would live in a country where they would not be judged by their skin color, but by the content of their character. Martin had a dream that when children sing, my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, the words ring true for everyone. He spoke of faith and truth, love and hope. Finally, Martin said, his voice like thunder, let freedom ring from every hill and every mountainside, from every state and every city. Let freedom ring. And if we do, people of all colors and all faiths will join hands and sing, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Marchers cheered and cheered. Some wept tears of pride, joy, and hope. They would never forget this day. Many who had been strangers before the march were forever bonded by that moment in time. People all over the country watched the march on television or listened on the radio. They felt the spirit of the day too. They were reminded that all people are meant to be free. Martin's dream wasn't his alone. It was a dream millions of Americans shared. Now his dream lives forever in the hearts and minds of people everywhere, and the march for freedom goes on. This is a special author's note. 10 months later, on July 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law. It is unclear whether the March on Washington brought about the passing of this bill, but it was a step forward in the civil rights movement in America. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, this book was, I think, $5 or less at Five Below. I implore you to just go search their bins and see what they have. This was a book that was apropos for today, and so I'm really glad that Madison made the suggestion because I'd had two other options out, and she said, this is the one. Don't add to it, don't take away from it. This is the one to read today, mommy. This day is set aside for us to serve and to serve well, to complete an act of service. Because as Dr. King said, he was a drum major for justice. He was a perpetual public servant, a servant for the people, a servant of God. And one thing that's unique about him is that because he was so committed to liberty truly and justice for all people, he also realized that there were injustices by way of labor. So he was for race, equity, and labor equity. And one thing that he did, even with his marches, is that, of course, he had the ability and to be able to afford clothes and shoes, and he needed them because of how much he had to speak in public. But he would buy multiple or several of the exact same suits, several of the exact same shoes to make sure that he wasn't being too flashy and that he minimized what he wore so that he could maximize the sound that reverberated throughout the United States for justice and equity. So I really encourage you all to share the message, to spread the word, and to do everything that you possibly can to make sure that the sound of freedom indeed does ring from the highest mountains to the lowest valley. Do your part, make him proud. God bless you, and we'll see you next time at Story Time. Take care, everybody.